Welcome back to the next episode of TMT with Mike O'Reilly. My guest is FCC Commissioner Olivia Trusty, the second Republican and the newest member of the FCC. Thanks so much for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Well, thank you to have us in your office on a closed Washington, D.C., basically.
Yes, that said, we are hustling. We are very busy. We've been out making speeches, visiting with people, and so we just hope the shutdown ends sooner rather than later.
Well, outstanding. Maybe we could start the conversation with an easy topic.
Sure.
Your background is one who came from a wonderful institution, spent a lot of time on Capitol Hill. What do you think prepared you best as you had that former role?
Sure. Well, you know, I spent about 10 and a half years on Capitol Hill. It was a great experience. I learned a lot. I learned more about telecommunications, technology, and national security policy, as well as the legislative process. I learned about how to engage with stakeholders and the importance of constituent services. I also learned about how to find common ground when priorities didn't necessarily align. And perhaps most importantly, I learned about member priorities on both sides of the aisle. And so all of those things that I learned are deeply relevant and applicable to the job I have now.
Do you miss the institution?
You know, there are things that I miss, but it's so close by that I can run up there anytime I want. And plus, we're having so much fun here, and we're very busy, so I can't dwell on that too often.
That's fair. Do you find it difficult to transition from a staff role behind the scenes to someone who's now the principal?
You know, I think with any new job, there are some adjustments to be made. I'm dealing with the press in a way that's different than before. I am voting now. I make the final decisions for our office, but at the same time, there are a lot of similarities. We are continuing to meet with stakeholders to learn about their needs and challenges, what's working, what's not working, and how to advance better policy solutions. And I'm surrounded by a great team. So in a lot of ways, I feel like I'm right at home.
And you mentioned press. Are there other aspects that are different from your previous role? Is there something else that jumps out at you as like, wow, that's just, hadn't experienced that before?
Yeah, I would say press, voting, making statements, and I would say just being in this position where I'm making these final decisions where I'm in charge and the buck stops with me.
What has been the experience with a three-person FCC? You know, traditionally is 5 members. We've seen it at 3. We've seen 4 or 5. How is that operational working so far for you?
Yeah, so at a 3-person commission, it's the norm for me. Yes, I spent a couple of years on the Commerce Committee where I helped to oversee the commission, but where there were 5 commissioners at the time. But overseeing a commission versus working inside of a commission are 2 totally different things. So this is the norm. I don't really have anything to compare it to, but so far so good.
And how are your relations with do you meet regularly with the Commissioner Gomez and with the Chairman Carr? Do you have a chance do you do regular meetings with them? It's an opportunity to chat through things?
Absolutely. I meet regularly with Chairman Carr and Commissioner Gomez. We all have a great relationship. I'm sure that they're meeting with each other as well. You know, we might quibble about different things, but we're all here. We share a purpose and a mutual respect for each other, and we're looking to carry out the mission of the FCC the best way we can.
And have you had a chance yet to kind of deal with Commissioner Gomez or find something to work on commonality? It's only been a few months, so so take your time.
Well, not yet. We haven't had the opportunity to work on any projects or negotiate items together, but I imagine that could be something that happens in the future.
And what do you think, you know, as this is the norm, what's your guess of what it's like to have 5? You have 2 colleagues, you know, if there ever were to be. Do you anticipate that being different, or is it kind of just as you operate today?
You know, it could be different. The more the merrier. It's something that I haven't given much thought to because we've been busy setting up the office, building a team, and really introducing ourselves to as many people as possible.
So coming from the Congress to the executive branch, or at least a part of the executive branch, how do you see the FCC fitting within the executive branch? There's been a lot of debate over the independence of the agency. How do you see as part of that discussion?
Sure. So when I think about the FCC within the scope of the executive branch, I think first and foremost about policy. When President Trump was elected, he talked about his vision for a new golden age for America. And to me, that means federal agencies, including the FCC, should be focused on advancing policies that drive prosperity, leadership, and strength within our respective mission sets. So that's really been top of mind for me since I've been at the Commission.
And what's your take of those that say the independence of the agency has been lost?
Yeah. So you know that this is an open legal question about whether the FCC is legally independent from the executive branch. I'm going to defer to the courts. I'll defer to political pundits to weigh in on that issue. My focus and top priority remains carrying out the mission of the FCC and doing my best to contribute to President Trump's agenda.
So there's this school of thought that commissioners need to, early on in their term, grab onto issues and make them theirs.
Yeah.
I always thought that that's the independent person's decision. You can, you can't. It's your decision. Have you had a chance to find things, or are you waiting on that process?
You know, I care about a lot of things. Coming from the Hill, I worked on a number of issues, and I care about a lot of things that the FCC does here, but I'll narrow it down to 3 issues that I'm focused on. Universal connectivity. I see that as the cornerstone of the FCC's mission. I also care deeply about national security and making sure we have reliable, resilient, and secure networks. And then I care a lot about restoring U.S. leadership in next generation communications technologies, whether via spectrum policy, artificial intelligence, or our role in international standard setting bodies. So I think you can expect me to lend my voice and advocacy efforts to each of those 3 things.
I think I saw one of your first op-eds, or maybe your first op-ed was on the issue of critical infrastructure attacks,
Yeah.
those that are physically destroying networks throughout our nation. What gravitated you towards that issue, and is there a role for the FCC to play?
Absolutely. So, you know, I think when it comes to infrastructure vandalism or things like copper theft, this has a direct impact on our economic security, our national resilience, and public safety. And I think there's certainly more we can be doing to protect consumers and businesses from this growing problem. You know, when I think about what our authorities are at the FCC, they probably aren't sufficient to address this issue. You know, some have proposed maybe some regulatory fixes. I don't know that that would be tremendously effective, but what we can do is we can work with providers to help them harden their networks to be less susceptible to these kinds of attacks. We can also educate consumers, helping them to transition to more modern networks that are also less vulnerable to these types of attacks. We can work with law enforcement to bring more accountability or visibility and attention to this issue to hold bad actors accountable. And of course, we can work with Congress to pass legislation that criminalizes these types of activities. There is bipartisan legislation in the House Judiciary Committee, and so I'd love to see that get through and get past the finish line as an additional tool we can use to protect our nation's communications infrastructure.
Outstanding. You mentioned universal connectivity as one of your issues and one of the agency's foremost obligations. One of the interesting twists, I would say, of the Biden infrastructure law was to have less of a role of the FCC comparably in the past, and kind of shifts authority over to the NTIA. What do you see as the role of the FCC in the overall in part of that equation, the BEAD itself, and then where do you see what can you do to help universal BEAD be successful? I guess I would say.
Sure. So I care a lot about universal connectivity. I had the opportunity to work for Congressman Bob Latta of Ohio and Senator Roger Wicker of Mississippi, both of whom represent rural areas with underserved communities. But I've seen what broadband connectivity can do for those communities when they are connected, thanks to those legislators' efforts. It is a catalyst for economic activity, for job creation, for access to affordable and quality health care. It helps with education, improve public safety, and so much more. So it really helps to improve a person's quality of life. And so I see my role here as being very committed to tackling the regulatory obstacles that stand in the way of achieving universal connectivity. I think the Universal Service Program is a critical part of this equation, and I think more needs to be done to ensure its long-term sustainability and viability. As with BEAD and NTIA, I see a role here for interagency coordination to ensure that there's no fragmentation or duplication in BEAD and USF investments as resources are targeted to unserved areas. I think that is the best role for the FCC to play, to coordinate with NTIA to be better stewards of taxpayer dollars and to frankly accelerate the closure of the digital divide.
And have you had a chance to talk to NTIA yet, or plan to in the future about BEAD and where it's going?
Yeah, we are regularly coordinating with NTIA to ensure that it gets the job done in connecting more homes and businesses across the country.
You mentioned obstacles to deployment. What is your take on some of the issues that have been longstanding problems, whether it be poles or easements or rights of way, the actual deployment of the network or permitting, other issues that really get in the nuts and bolts of building and deploying a network itself? Can the Commission do more in that space? Should it do more?
Absolutely. So earlier this year, you know that the chairman initiated his Build America agenda. And that is all about unleashing growth and innovation across the communications sector. And one of the main parts of that agenda is simplifying rules, reducing regulatory burdens on businesses, and streamlining licensing and permitting processes to better promote broadband providers' build-out efforts. So some of the specific things we're doing is making sure the pole attachment process is more cost-effective and transparent. We're also looking to make sure environmental and historic reviews required under the National Environmental Protection Act and the National Historic Preservation Act are more predictable and efficient. And right now we are actively evaluating the scope of the FCC's authorities and how they can, preemption authorities, and how they can be used to address state and local barriers to broadband deployment, things like rights-of-way access. So those efforts are ongoing, and I expect our work to continue on that front.
And do you think that it'd be helpful if Congress were to jump in here and deal with the issue of rates for pole attachments and things of that nature? Is there a role for the legislators to, without suggesting you should tell them what to do, but do you think that there would be helpful? How about that? Would you think it'd be helpful if Congress were to answer some questions here?
Absolutely. I always think it's helpful for Congress to engage here to give more certainty in this regulatory environment.
So, as deployment plays out, how do you envision BEAD? Do you see it being successful? Is there, in your mind, do you think that the dollars will be well spent and that we'll get to a relative universal connectivity for any household that's unserved today?
So here's what I'll say. I have full faith and confidence in Secretary Lutnick and Administrator Roth in implementing BEAD, and that it will be a successful program. I think at the FCC, we stand ready to help however we can to ensure their success, but I know the program is in really good hands.
And do you envision, at the end that there's still going to be some really difficult households that just didn't make it through the cuts, and there will still need to be some type of federal program, whether it be on the universal USF side of the equation or a new federal law by Congress to address those households? There
potentially. One of the things that I heard in my travels in Mississippi and Alaska when I met with providers is concerns about, if they're not connected or the ongoing operation and maintenance costs. And USF seems to be how we can continue to meet connectivity needs across the country. As you know as well, there's an ongoing bipartisan, bicameral congressional working group to look at what the future of USF should like, given outstanding needs like the ones you've just mentioned, or for operations and maintenance. And so, we stand ready here to work with Congress to ensure the USF program continues to be modernized to meet those types of issues.
One of the issues that on Capitol Hill that gravitated its attention has been the number of federal programs that exist for broadband deployment, not just broadband, but broadband deployment. If BEAD is successful, should we look to reduce the number of programs, not have duplicity? Sorry.
Yeah, so there was a GAO report done a couple of years ago that identified 133 broadband programs across 15 federal agencies. They were fragmented and duplicative. So absolutely, I think there's an opportunity to consolidate and streamline those programs to better target resources to underserved communities and be better stewards of taxpayer dollars.
And what does that mean for the high cost fund? You talked a little bit about that, but is there a chance to potentially reduce the cost for the overall size of the program?
Well, I think this is an issue that'll be teed up in discussions in the Congressional Working Group, and I look forward to that ongoing conversation. I know how important the Universal Service Fund is to communities across this country, and that is another consideration that should go into deciding what the future program should look like.
Tell me a little bit about your trip to Alaska. What was that like?
It was great. It was so eye-opening. We went to a small little village in Eek, Alaska. We took one of those taxi plains. It was an interesting experience. We walked on the tundra. It was squishy, but you just saw how difficult it is to serve these areas. Sometimes you can only get equipment there via barge or plane, and it's so expensive. And then just some of the logistics of building out this infrastructure it's really difficult. So my hat's off to providers in Alaska who are able to provide these services even in the conditions that they experience. But it's clear that they have very unique connectivity needs in that part of the world.
Switching gears just slightly, broadcasting issues have gathered quite a bit of attention at the FCC in the last few months. But broadcasting itself has been facing a number of challenges in the marketplace. There are a number of providers on the streaming side of the equation as people's attention shifts. What do you see as the long-term role of broadcasting, or what's their function in the marketplace going forward?
So, what I can say here is I think local news will continue to be important to communities across the country, which is why at the FCC we are focused on modernizing our broadcast regulatory framework to empower broadcasters to compete in a very competitive and dynamic marketplace. I think if we get the regulatory framework right, they'll be able to compete for viewers, for programming, for ad revenue, generate cost savings and reinvest those resources back into the communities that they serve, expanding access to local content and advancing the public interest. So I think if we at the Commission get the regulatory framework right, that will certainly bode well for the future of broadcasting.
Without talking about any particular transaction, how do you approach M&A in the TMT world, in the communications space? Do you have a vision for how you approach it? There was this phrase during my time, big is bad and small is only good, and I just don't know how do you approach the universe?
Yeah, so a couple thoughts here. I think when it comes to transactions, my job is to look at them through the lens of what advances the public interest. As you know, these are very fact-specific inquiries that require a thoughtful and thorough review of information in the record, and they need to be evaluated on a case-by-case basis. When it comes to big is bad, I don't necessarily subscribe myself to that line of thinking. I think when it comes to consolidation, it could sometimes be good for consumers. It could reduce costs, it could improve the financial health of the combined entities. They could share their research and development dollars to foster the creation of new innovative services or expand service and coverage offerings, be stronger competitors in the marketplace, all of which helps to benefit consumers. On the flip side, though, I do acknowledge that transactions could lead to market concentration or barriers to entry that might result in discriminatory practices that reduce consumer choice or stifle innovation. That being said, I think the FCC has a responsibility to consider both types of scenarios when evaluating a transaction so that we don't potentially overlook consumer benefits to an M&A before the Commission.
One thing that resonated on Capitol Hill for a number of Congresses was the idea of consolidating M&A review. We've got separate entities, whether it be the FCC or the FTC or DOJ, that have different lenses on a transaction, can make the process quite extensive. Do you have views on that? Do you see the FCC's role as unique today, or could they be combined with other agencies into having a simplified process?
As two former Hill staffers, I would say I can't wait to see what Congress decides. And my job is to implement the law as I know it, and we have it today. And then whatever Congress decides will inform what we do next.
And have you had a chance to have conversations with DOJ yet and get to meet some of those folks over there?
I have had some conversations with them. I hope to have more in the coming months and years that I'm here.
So, when you look at national security, you mentioned as your third prong of one of your topics, the agency has certainly been more aggressive in the last few years in addressing, what I would call, concerns or even physical attacks by, foreign agents, sometimes nation states. Will that work continue, do you imagine? And where do you see the line between the agency's authority expiring and other agencies stepping into that function?
Sure. So, I spent a couple of years on the Senate Armed Services Committee, And it really opened my eyes to the sophistication and persistence of threats that are targeting our critical infrastructure and specifically our communications networks. I think fortunately the chairman has created a National Security Council within the Commission, which is a great platform for us to leverage our authorities in the Secure and Trusted Communications Networks Act to focus on enhancing the resilience of our supply chain through things like the Bad Labs proceeding, and to better coordinate with federal agencies who have more primary jurisdiction in the areas of national security and intelligence. I think regrettably this is going to be an issue that continues to be with us just because there are so many countries who are looking to obtain strategic advantage over the United States. But it's something that I know is top of mind for me and as well as the other commissioners here, and so I expect more work on this front.
Maybe we'll back up a little bit and ask easier questions.
Sure.
Thank you for your knowledge base there. When you look out, do you have a vision? I plan to do this for the next 30 years. Do you have a next stage, or is it take it as it comes?
Definitely take it as it comes. There's always some late breaking news, I feel like, every day or every week that keeps us on our toes, but it's a lot of fun to be meeting with people, to learn more about the issues. It's a fast-paced agency, and with the chairman's bold agenda, there's just a lot to do and get accomplished in these next couple of years.
Are you finding that you have a week planned out and something drops in the middle of it and you've got to divert or shift, somewhat like Capitol Hill, but a little different?
There might have been something like that. Nothing is coming to mind right now, but I think it's just a lot of fun. The staff are great here. You learn a lot. People are very interested in what we're doing. It's so foundational to what's going on in the economy and just globally, and so you got to be ready to tackle it as it comes.
Well, I can't thank you enough for your time.
Thank
I want to
you.
let you get back to work and really appreciate it.
Thank you, Mike.
Thank you very much.
Appreciate it.